Hello, EJ. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being on. And for those of you guys who don't know EJ and you live in Atlanta, I am surprised by that admission. I feel like EJ, you have such a extensive network. A lot of people I know you. Like a lot of people just in Atlanta, I feel like know you. And I think that speaks to your character and like your impact to the community. So yeah, if you could, for those of you who don't, for those of the listeners who might not know you, can you give us kind of a brief intro, who you are, what you do, and kind of your history with Atlanta?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David, for having me on. And I'm yeah, it kind of makes me, turn my head a little bit when you say that people know me because I feel like I could kind of go, it could be really good or it could be really bad, depending. But you did throw in the character piece, so maybe that's good. I don't know. Even that still is questionable at times. So anyway, all that to say, yeah, name's EJ. It's short for Unjin. Um, yeah, I can go for hours, but just about my name. If anyone's ever talked knows me, my legally my name's John. My name's John Lee. I go by EJ largely because yeah, somewhere in my wandering and trying to discover myself, like I felt like getting back to my Korean roots and my name and my birth name was really important. And then realizing that Eunjin is actually a girl's name and that really threw me off a little bit. But I'd always heard that, but I've never met another Eunjin until I
Hmm.
did, and then that became really confusing. So yeah, anyway, so
Well, that's
hence the
actually
EJ,
that's
right?
really interesting because usually it's the other way around. Like my legal name is my Korean name, Donghun, but I go by David. Although legally speaking,
Ah,
I'm not a David at all. So that's interesting that it's you kind of wanted to find your roots and then you went back to your birth name. Huh.
yeah, yeah. It's, I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah. I hated John. I mean, but again, we could probably spend the whole podcast talking about how I, we all kind of have a desire to be different, and
Hmm.
we always want to make our mark and separate ourselves in some way, right? Usually
Yeah.
good, but sometimes bad. um but yeah, I just didn't like John Lee. It was just kind of vanilla, and then in my church, like there were so many John Lees. And
Mm.
anyway, so that happened. But yeah, I was born and raised here in Atlanta. um Atlanta's home, and that's why I love this city. I care about this city. I root for the city and I fight for the city. I'm a recovering pastor now, a real estate developer.
Mm.
Um, but I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. But I feel like I try to use real estate and development in particular as a vehicle,
Mm.
to do the work that I really feel like God's called me to do,
Yeah.
which is helping communities. So anyway, I'm sure we'll get there. If we don't,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
So before we get there, though, I want to ask you about because it's interesting you put it as recovering pastor, and I wanted to ask you. It's actually more for personal benefit. So
Hmm.
just a little history. I used to go to a church called Hanbit, the Korean term for one light. And I went there for many years, and then finally I left that church to go to my parents' church because my parents were pretty much begging me to come to their church to attend one church as a family. So I left in 2010. Yeah, the beginning of 2010, I left, and I heard soon thereafter you took over as the EM pastor there at Hampi, right? But
That's
then,
correct.
because I had a lot of friends there still. Later, I forget how long it was. Like I forget how long your tenure at Hampi was, but I heard about the kind of the way that you and the church split ways. It was an interesting story to me. So I was wondering if, because I never heard it from you, do you think you could kind of explain to us the circumstances in which, um, I guess, your employment at Happy started and then how it eventually ended?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to. Yeah, yeah, you're actually taking me way back. So I'm gonna have to, some of all the details are a little bit foggy, but
Hmm.
from what I can remember, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not that old, and it wasn't that long ago. So, yeah, I guess, you know, just to kind of give you a little context, I actually was introduced to Hanbit by one of my professors at Columbia Theological Seminary, right? So David Che was the interim pastor at Hanbit at the time, and just make a long story short, he asked me to come and speak at one of the youth retreats, their youth retreat, and I loved it. I mean, I loved the students, and it just, there's this kind of instantaneous, like, I don't know, like chung. I don't know if like Hanbit just had a lot of chung. I don't know how, like, charm, charisma. The students were, I mean, they're just really lovely. And when I was there, I loved, I really bonded with them, so and not to mention, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this part is my wife's cousin is Jason Hahn. Right. So yeah, so that was, and he was in college, and and he loved the Lord, and he was like serving, and this is right after Kit and Allison had left. And was, in Korea. And so it really just kind of broke my heart. It was like a bit of like sheep without a shepherd. And you got between, Jason, I don't know if I can drop names, but
go for it.
I'll just drop Jason because he's family. It doesn't really matter. But Jason, and a couple other college students who were just kind of really devoted to caring for the students there. And so, yeah, I when I graduated, I agreed to come and pastor. And it was cool because, though David Che was the interim pastor, he just really understood, first and second generation. He was obviously a seminary student or seminary professor that taught a lot of Asian American students, and just really had an understanding of the landscape. And he had been in the game for a long time, and so he gave me a lot of autonomy for the ministry, and he just really supported me a lot. I mean, I don't know if he necessarily mentored me per se, like, when I don't recall ever sitting in there, but he did give me a lot of just freedom to dream and just pursue whatever I felt like the Lord was putting on my heart. And straight out of seminary, I mean, you got a lot of ambitions and dreams, and I really was trying and hoping and believing that Hanbit would become one day like an EM, right? Yeah, regardless of size, like we would be self-sufficient. That's what I meant, not like just an offshoot of the Korean church that happened to speak English, but literally church, for the second generation. And that was the vision, that was a dream. And I kind of ran it that way, in the sense that I told the KM, I was like, hey, send me as a second generation missionary, or, send me as a missionary to the second generation, right? Like, and, just give me a stipend, and you don't have to worry about any ministry budget. Like, we will raise it, from our own offering, and what we don't raise and we don't have, then we won't use, and so I wanted to try to create the sense of like, ownership, from being like, at their parents' church, essentially. So it was like 2 years of that, and I was just kind of working through that. And under covering of Reverend Che, like, it seemed okay. It seemed like the elders were okay with that. They were just happy people were showing up. You know what I mean? Because when I first got there, literally there was 11 students, and that's including like the college students, the 3 college students, and then a handful of families that were there. Literally on my first Sunday there, it was 11 students. And by the end, there was, 50-ish,
Wow.
which is pretty sizable in 2 years, and so we were actually like doing really well, like going on mission trips, like self-funded mission trips, in the sense that we didn't have to ask the KM for any money, right? Literally, We would raise all of it. Car washes. If it took a year and a half to fundraise, we did that, you know, and which was the case for India. So the kind of moment that kind of basically created this kind of domino effect of me having to resign as the pastor at IHTHT basically started like maybe a year prior to that, where a permanent pastor got called and David left, Reverend Che left. And at that point, that pastor and the session at the time, the elders, I don't, you know, and this is my interpretation, but there was a bit of a power play, I think. One, because, you know, I was, you know, it was a measly stipend, but I was making, I think, $1,800 a month, ish, 16 or 18, I don't remember. It was less than 2,000 a month, you know, so full-time work, part-time pay, fine, that's totally cool. But they were really starting to try to cut budget. They were really trying to get handles and kind of reclaim the church, right? Because they had a new pastor and now they, you know, had plans. And so I began to notice like there were a lot more kind of interested in what I was doing, et cetera, et cetera. But people were showing up, so it was fine, you know. Make a long story short, we were supposed to go to India initially in the summer of 2012. Okay. But for whatever reason, like we didn't raise enough money, you know, and we bought the tickets. We just didn't raise enough money because I had a target. I don't remember what the target was, but we didn't have money and we were fundraising, but the money wasn't coming through. And I just felt like, you know, in my spirit, like I was like, you know what, I don't think we're supposed to go to India right now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we're ready. I just don't think God wants us to go, right? You know, and that's a call I'd had to make, you know, and we were, you know, I mean, you've been on mission trips, right? Like, it's a lot of preparation, you know. It wasn't like we're going to Mexico, not to say that there's anything wrong with Mexico, but we're going to India, you know, so it's a big commitment. But all that to say, like, you know, so we cut the trip. And between the time that we cut the trip and the next summer, the pastor came, right? But at that point, we didn't cancel our tickets. We actually postponed the tickets. Does that make sense? Right? Like, so we didn't actually cancel the tickets. We had the tickets. We just didn't have enough money to get us through the trip, plus actually bless the people that we're trying to go to be a blessing to, right? Like, you know, and so, yeah, so we just honestly, so we fundraised that whole next year, right? And we just stayed on it. Like we just continue to pursue it and just say, you know what, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when, and let's just keep going after it. And, you know, and there was a dedicated group, like 6 of us, and they were all college students, right? So the youngest one was going to graduate that summer. So she was a senior and then graduated and then was going to go her freshman summer before her freshman year. So we're all college students. As far as I'm concerned, we're all young adults. And we were just working, you know, to make this happen. Sorry, this is actually getting really long.
No, it's great.
But somewhere in between there, that year was a very like hard year in India. It just got really dark and all the news that was coming out of India was really bad, particularly around you know, just how women were being treated and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It was just really bad stuff coming out of India. And it was all in the news internationally and stuff like that. And so some of the parents caught hold of that and they were saying like, oh my gosh, India is such a bad place. And it's so, you know, it's just bad. And, you know, and they kept on kind of saying that to me. And I'm like, well, that's why we're going. You know what I mean? Like you're, you know, like we've been training. This is why the Lord's gave us an extra year to get ready for this moment. You know what I mean? Like, as far as I'm concerned, like there's no turning back now, you know, like, not to mention like everyone's already kind of bought in. And so I kept on saying, no, it's fine, you know? And I was trying to explain to them, I was like, look, that's Mumbai, right? Like that's, we're going to Andhra Pradesh, like we're going to, about Vizeg, like it's on the other side. Like literally, I was like, one of the arguments that I was giving, and this is towards the end, like okay, so we're scheduled to leave July 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I remember all of this, like it was yesterday. Supposed to leave July 2nd. Right around like May, they started putting on a lot of pressure. Like even the pastor was like, I don't think you should go. Like, do you have to go? He pulled me aside and he's like, how's the mission funding coming along? Like they were really hoping like, we weren't having enough money. And I was like, no, we're actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like we actually, and I was just kind of sharing with him how like we were blessed and, these are all of our things that we're going to do. We're going to be able to, buy like 5 cows or 4 cows for 4 villages. That's going
Oh,
to, X,
wow.
Y, and Z, like, and I was like super amped and I was like, God's doing all this awesome stuff. And rather than like getting excited with me, like he literally kept, I was like, yeah, well, and if you know this pastor, he's hilarious. And he just kept, he just wouldn't say a lot of words, but he would just make a lot of noises, but you knew they're very disgruntled noises. And, and, yeah. And, and so they kept on bringing it up and they would have interventions. Like, so the session would call me in, they would bring in like the Korean newspaper and show me these things that was happening. And they're like, it's so dangerous. And I'm like, you're right. We have to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, in this one, in the one argument, they're like, and this is what I was like, that happened in Mumbai. We're going to Bazag. Hey, did you know that there was a bombing in Boston? Should we leave Atlanta? I was like, should we move to LA? Oh, wait, LA had an earthquake. Should we go? I was just trying to,
Right.
obviously I was being kind of I was being petty, but at the same time, like I felt like it was just a pretty ridiculous thing to pull out thing from a newspaper that happened in a city that was literally 24-hour flight away from where we're going.
Wow.
Okay, maybe not 24 hours, but literally it's like a whole nother flight, like another 5 hours between cities. You know what I mean? So, and it's like New York City versus like, rural Oklahoma, so I was just kind of like, this is not making sense. So yeah, it just kind of persisted this way, but I kind of stuck to my guns and I kept on saying, look, like, this is the moment that we've been kind of waiting for. This is why, and I was like, look, if we didn't have any students, like if we had any youth kids, I would understand, but these are all college students. What do you think they're going to do when they go to college? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is what as far as I was concerned, I was like, this is what the church is for, right? Like it's preparing them and equipping them with the gospel and saying, hey, like, there's something large on your life, like, and shouldn't be fearful. I mean, you should be wise, but you shouldn't be fearful. And and basically it just kind of going back and forth, and I just kept on saying, look, I can't cancel the trip now. Right? It was May, it was the end of May. We were leaving in less than in like a month, and they're like, keep on canceling. I was like, can't you go to Mexico? And I was like, I even like pulled up like the travel advisor warnings, and I was like, look, India's not on here. Guess what? Mexico's on here. Like literally, I was like showing them. I was like, Mexico's on here. Like India's fine, but they were just so like adamant that we shouldn't go to India. And then I made like kind of a promise. I was like, look, we've been planning this trip for over 18 months, just let me go. And I promise on the next trip, we will have more buy-in, right? Because I kind of planned it without them. I get it. I didn't ask for permission, right? But I talked to the interim pastor and he was like, cool, because before that we went to Costa Rica. Before that, like we traveled to IHOP. Like, I mean, we were like doing things, and yeah, anyway, I'm sorry, this story is getting really long, but
no, it's awesome.
I'm going to land the plane. This is what happened. 2 days, literally we're leaving on Tuesday. Sunday, I asked the finance chair to release the money that had been donated to Hambeat because I need to take it with me, right? And he said, no.
What?
Yeah. Because that, I mean, obviously support or support checks and, all this stuff was all made out the Humvee, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, I need the money, like, because we're leaving on Tuesday. This
Yeah.
is Sunday afternoon after service. And he's like, we can't because, oh, sorry, one more important piece of information. I, I made everyone sign a release waiver, basically saying that Humbeat as a church was not liable for anything that might happen on this trip.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we were going completely independent. We went to a bank together as a team, got it all notarized. Like, literally was like as like official and legit as we could possibly make it, because the church just didn't want to have any liability in the case that something happened while we were at the church or on the trip, and they would be held liable and
Mm-hmm.
sued, and it wouldn't look good. I was trying to explain to them, what if we do something great for the kingdom of God? Like, do you still not want any, of that glory, right? Like, I
Yeah.
was like, it can go both ways. Like, I
Yeah.
could see where you're trying to, cut your risks, but you're cutting out your glory too. And but they were like, so I signed these paperwork. I was like, all right, fine, maybe this is what it's going to take, right? And then that Sunday, I guess they had huddled up that morning and basically was like, we can't give you the money, because if
But
we give you the money.
this is money that was donated specifically for the trip though, right?
Of course,
Wow.
of course,
Yeah.
they didn't give us a cent, nor did
Mm.
we ask. All we literally asked was that they would pray and bless us, and they were like, no,
Wow.
right? You're going on your own. So I was like, fine, we'll go on our own. Again, I was young, like I was younger. I'm still young, David. All
Yeah.
right. Just for the record,
Of
let it
course,
be
yeah.
known that I am still young. I was younger, and, obviously a bit headstrong, but I really believed it, man.
Yeah.
I really do. And I still do. I mean, obviously you can kind of hear it probably in my voice. I still believe it. Um, and so when he basically was like, you can't do it, I kind of snapped. I was like really upset,
Mm.
because this has gone just too ridiculous, and I went to the pastor and I pleaded with him. I was like, look, I was like, I can't not go and then show up next Sunday and preach obedience or preach anything of the gospel. Like, you're basically like you're giving me no choice,
Yeah.
and he was just like, we can't be liable. And I was like, well, that's not your money,
Yeah.
I'm like, it was literally $22,000. I was like, it's not your money,
Wow.
and I need to get that money back, And so we literally sat there and he wrote checks back to every single person for 18 months. And we sat in his office for 2.5 hours. I'm like fuming, and we sat down. I was like, make, $100 to so-and-so, $250 to so-and-so, $1,000 to so-and-so, and literally was just like, and yeah, I mean, when it was all said and done, it was probably, because we got cash too. So I had the cash, I just didn't have the checks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when it was all said and done, it was probably close to maybe about, I don't know, I don't remember, maybe $15,000, $16,000 ish, because I remember having $7,000 in cash, and wrote it all out. And I had just had a grip of checks, and we're leaving on Tuesday, Sunday night. I called my parents. I'm like furious. I don't know what to do. I was like, we're
Mm-hmm.
leaving and we have no money. We have $7,000. Oh, and before that, as he was writing the checks, what happened right before that was when I actually resigned. I guess that was the whole point of this whole story was, they were like, you're not going to go, and not as a member of Humbeat, and I was like, hey, I signed that notarized form. I'm not going to claim Humbeat, I'm not taking any Humbeat t-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, literally I'm going, and he was like, no, but you're still a member of this church, so you can't go, as a staff. And I was like, fine, then I resign. And so like
Um,
I wrote, and I still have it upstairs, actually, this letter that says, I, John E. Lee, on this date resign as the, pastor of the English ministry at Humbeat or whatever, dated it,
wow.
turned it in, and was like, all right, you got to start writing some checks. And so we sat down and started writing all the checks. And I left. Yeah, it was crazy. And I walked away and left, and I didn't know how to tell the team. I didn't know how to, I didn't, I mean, everyone kind of knew what was going on, but they didn't really know. And so, yeah. And then of course, God comes through, I'm like calling all my close friends and saying, hey, like, you're not going to get a tax break, but can you write the check out to me,
Mm,
and I need it tomorrow because I'm leaving Tuesday,
yeah.
Yeah. And, I had to borrow some money from my parents, and I, obviously I had money, and, yeah, and we just kind of cobbled it together, and we went, and,
Wow.
yeah, so that's what happened, man. And that's kind of the kind of glorious yet tragic end, to my time at Humbeat.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is, like, basically I told him, I was like, look, because this happened like after service, you know what I mean? So everyone's gone,
Hmm.
And so I was like, look, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks after this trip. It's literally 2 weeks. We weren't even gone for that long. Like, it
Hmm.
was a 10-day trip, really. Cause if you take out the flight times, right, the travel time.
Right.
And I was like, look, I'm going to come back next week, right, when we get back. I was like, on that Sunday, I'm going to come back and I'm going to say goodbye, because, obviously, like, I can't, I can't
Yeah.
just leave and not show up again. Right. Like,
Yeah.
so that was like my one term. And I was like, I'm quitting today. I'm not a member, but next on this date, like, I will come back to say goodbye to everybody. Yeah, and that was it. And that was goodbye.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
so okay. I knew that the India trip was the reason why you
Mm-hmm.
left. I did not know all the details and like all the hurdles and all the obstacles they placed in front of you. So I
Yeah.
mean, but how was the trip? How was the actual mission trip?
Oh, dude, it was glorious.
Mm,
I mean, seriously, like, and so there were 6 people that went,
mhm,
right? Me and my wife, um, a young gentleman, and one, two, three, four, and then the rest were girls. So there were
mm,
4 girls, including my wife, and then
mhm.
2 guys. So 6 people, not a big team. Obviously, it's an expensive trip.
Yeah.
And it became so clear and evident, like, why the Lord wanted, because they were like, why are there so many girls going? They kept on saying, like, your whole team is just girls, like, why are you taking a bunch of girls to India, this, that, and the other. And literally, like, I was like, I don't know. Like, I know we're going to do some ministry with some orphanages. I don't know what God has in store for us, but we're just going to go, like, in faith. And we got there, and we knew, like, the first day, like, why God had assembled the team that we did, because we had started working with all these at-risk girls, teenage
Uh,
girls, that I had no idea, that we weren't planning to
wow.
work with them,
Yeah.
right? But the day we get there, that morning we get there, starting from that evening, like, the girls are just having to minister to all these girls that were at risk. And honestly, it was just me and David were just kind of sitting on the side going, like, what should we do?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm,
like, we should just pray and just cover over them. But literally the ministry was theirs, and
mm,
that was like that literally almost the whole trip. um and so it was just a huge, like, one of those moments where you just kind of said, hey, like, it was worth it.
mm,
um it was worth me losing my job. Like, it was worth, uh just kind of everything, in the
mm,
sense that, you realize in those moments that, like, the things that are most important will cost you the most,
yeah.
and granted, it was 2 weeks, and I don't know what the long-term lasting impact was, but like I said, we were able to give, you know, uh, cows to, 4 villages. We were feeding, we were praying, we were blessing, we were preaching the gospel. Girls, the girls were being healed, and I mean, it was just 2 weeks of just glory, and
Mm,
I mean, those mission trips are difficult, in the sense that they're so short,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, the trip itself was pretty dope.
That's amazing. And that it just makes me think about the I think that's a symptom of one of the reasons why we have I guess well I guess that's a manifestation of the tension that the first gen Korean American church, I guess the first generation and the second generation have, right? I would consider it an extreme case, because I guess I don't know. I don't have that much experience with that level of tension between the first gen and the second gen. But man, how does that make you feel about the church dynamic that Korean Americans have, right? Because at least in Atlanta, there are maybe one or two really independent English ministries that are comprised of like Asian Americans, right? Most of the English ministries are attached to a church in some sense, right? Especially financially, right? So, I mean, did that experience kind of change the way you think about the dynamic between the first gen and the second gen at all?
Um, um, it honestly just kind of reaffirmed a little bit of the things that I already had kind of a preconceived notion or kind of a working hypothesis.
Mm,
I think I was trying to work really hard to try to create an alternative script,
mm,
right? An alternative narrative for our generation, uh, when it came to church,
mm,
you know, a homegrown, and again, I was super, super young, idealistic. I keep saying that because I do feel a little naive looking back at that time.
mm,
I think I fought a good fight. I think at the end of the day, no one really won. You know,
mm,
I think I can look back and tell the story in a way that I can hold my head up and say, "Hey, look, I didn't compromise." But there was no winners. Like we
mm,
all essentially took a loss. And yeah, and if you ask like, hey, has it changed my dynamic, changed my perception? Like, no, it just merely reinforced it.
mm,
And if it did anything, it just kind of took the wind out of my sails a bit. Because like I said, I thought we were making moves as a church, right? Like we're super organic, like a bunch of misfits that just we're learning to love God and learning to love each other, and
mm,
and try to do something different. When it came to our faith.
yeah.
And, in some way it was like an honor to be a part of that. But in some ways it felt a little premature the way that it all kind of went down. And you realize that, if you're not allowed to stand on the shoulders of the second generation or the generation before you, like you really aren't going to be able to make it very far,
Mm,
you know? And this is, yeah. And I think it's just in life, right? Like you build on the previous generations like legacy and their hard work. And it's this continuum, and this story that, we all kind of contribute to, right? And
yeah.
that's the way I look at it, right? And so if one generation doesn't understand that, or they want to try to write a different story for the next generation, there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be a disconnect, right? Like, and in some ways, like you're never going to be able to, you know, uh, to build anything cohesive, anything lasting. It's always
Mm,
going to be kind of predicated upon one generation's ability to do it, quote unquote, on their own.
mm,
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's a very kind of long-winded way of saying it. It didn't change anything. It reaffirmed it.
mm,
Following that experience, like, just kind of giving you the days after, like I was really praying while I was in India. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, you know,
mm,
like I literally just kind of left, and it was a bit of a whirlwind, and I didn't really even get the time to really think about what just happened, right? Like
right.
literally, it was just like, it was almost like survival, in the sense that like I had to make this work,
Yeah.
and So, those are long flights, and you get a lot of time to sit there and time reflect and pray and reflect some more, and, just really try to understand. And it was shortly thereafter, like, I felt Lord put on my heart, like, Isaiah 58.
Mm.
And that's where 58 was born. It was birthed out of literally that experience where, I don't know if you heard of 58, but
Yeah. Yeah.
58 was a ministry that, I tried to grow in, which is a whole nother different story. Try to grow within a church, like a church that was in a church that didn't really think that it was supposed to be a church. It's
Hmm.
kind of this weird thing that happened with 58. But yeah, but that the genesis of that, was that,
Hmm.
so in some ways, like, I I didn't give up at that point.
Hmm.
I tried, and I went. I had a friend, Pastor Daniel, at the time, who led Charis, and I had been kind of leaning on him a little bit for some wisdom on how to navigate what's been going on. So he was well aware of, like, kind of the tensions of, everything. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
even leading up to the trip, like, he was a bit of a confidant. Um, and so as soon as I got back, like, obviously I started talking to him, and and he was like, come to art, come to Karis, and anyway, the rest is history. But
Hmm.
so that's so that was July, and then I was like, I need a month, and then in August, right as the semester was starting, I launched a college ministry called 58.
Hmm.
um yeah so yeah, man.
So can I then ask you about what do you think about the prospect of kind of having a more reconciled first and second generation Korean church? Like, do you think it's possible? Do you think there's just too much cultural differences there, or well, yeah, what's your take on that? Having experienced what you experienced,
um what's your take on it?
I'm I think I'm naively hopeful.
Okay.
Because you were talking about, we need to be in order for the second generation to grow, like, we need to be able to stand on the shoulders of the things that the first generation or the previous generation accomplished, right? Like that's, um, yeah, and that makes sense. Like that's a really straightforward, logical way to efficiently, expound upon the accomplishments of the previous generation, right? So I see the benefit of it, and because of that, I'm hopeful, and like I want there to be more reconciliation. And I never experienced anything as extreme as what you experienced. I think yours is the only story where like someone I knew personally was like ended up leaving a church because of like lingering, or I guess first and second generation tension.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I would say I'm naively hopeful, but I want to take from someone who actually went through some real stuff here.
Yeah, I don't. If you're naively hopeful, I don't want to knowingly take that away from you. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think you have to be, man. Like, I don't.
Mm,
Again, like, if I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hopeful, right? Like,
mm,
I don't know if I'm naively hopeful, but I'm, again, like, I have hope in the gospel, right?
mm,
Like, if everything that we proclaim to be true about the power of the gospel and the power of reconciliation and love, and everything that we in some way have kind of built our life around, like, it would be a bit of um, a misstep to then turn around and say you don't have hope
mm.
in anything,
Yeah.
or the church or whatever. So I'm always very cautious. Now, has do I have scars? Absolutely. Do I have um, my doubts every day? You know,
Mm,
but faith is in the absence of doubt, right? I
mm,
mean, you've heard that before, right? Like,
mm,
so it's your ability to believe in the midst of your doubt that really is how you exercise your faith, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think in some way I have faith that it's possible. I think the one thing that I would caution anyone with, and even myself, is like, it doesn't have to look the way that we think it has to look,
Mm.
right? It doesn't have to be on the scale that we think it has to be, and yeah. And what, again, I think we have this kind of propensity to aggrandize glory,
Mm.
right? Even just the word itself, like, so, yeah, so God-sized things are always going to be supersized, and magnified, and, it's going to look a certain way, and it's like this, like we could have never imagined, or hoped for. And in some ways, like, it's true, but what if it's on the other side and saying, like, yeah, it's not what I imagined, but it's on that kind of disappointed side as opposed to the wow side. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
you can literally say the same thing, right? But is it this like awe, or is there a sense of disappointment? And at the end of the day, like, learning to check yourself and saying, hey, you know what? Like, it wasn't about me, and it was not the story that I would have written
Mm.
for God, that I happened to be a part of, you know, but yeah, it's genuinely God. And so I think God sometimes has a sense of humor if we learn not to take ourselves too seriously and transpose our seriousness onto God, and, and make him out to be in our image as opposed to understanding that we are in his. And yeah, so I take a more kind of, just a slightly different stance, I guess.
Mm.
I'd love to see it, man, but there's reconciliation between generations. There's reconciliation between race. There's reconciliation that needs to take all over the place, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't think in some way that the Korean church has a monopoly on having to be reconciled,
Right.
right? I mean, let's be honest, like, technically, Korea is the only country that's still in war, you know,
Right.
right? Like, they haven't even reconciled with themselves,
Yeah.
much less the generations that follow them. Like, how
Mm.
can you imagine that inability can then be passed down and exercised just because you gather in a church and has a cross on the building, right? Like, there has to be some deep rooted things that happen. I think my
Mm.
greatest disappointment, really, David, if I'm being honest, is like some of the church leaders that I see, you know, like, if I can kind of separate out, I think the leaders definitely have a greater sense of responsibility, and, and if I take the Bible seriously, they're going to be judged more seriously, right? Which is
Mhm.
it's a scary place. Um, I just don't, I think people have become, I don't know. I don't know. I think my disappointment isn't as a church, as the institution, as much as I am with some of the leadership that I find in the church. My
Mhm.
Humbeat experience is more geared towards not the church of Humbeat. Like, I still have such fond memories of Humbeat, and like I said, I think nothing but, like, so much, just a lot of chung, a lot
Mhm.
of love. And um, I think my real kind of pain points are with the leadership. Like, you call yourself ordained leaders,
Mm. Yeah.
and you guys don't know the gospel.
Mm.
You don't understand who you're stewarding, and, the young faith that, in the lives that you've been entrusted with. Like, and in some way, that irony is this whole thing blew up because they felt like they were, you know,
Right. Yeah.
and that's kind of, to me, kind of the tragedy of the whole story, is like, they thought they were doing the absolute right thing and I was in the wrong,
Mm.
right? And the hard part is I felt like they were in the wrong, and we're just not going to find a good eye to eye. Like, the only real compromise that I could come up with was like, hey, next trip. But they didn't want that on the next
Mm.
trip. They wanted it on this trip. And we're like, all right, well, then we're at an impasse,
Right.
and something's going to have to give. But yeah, I think that was, to me, the biggest tragedy looking back at it, is like, man, like, you guys are the leaders. Like, we're
Yeah.
looking to you to
Right.
help us, like, release us,
Mhm.
like, we're ready, I mean, and sure, like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on the generational thing. I think there's a window of opportunity, and there's an opportunity cost when it comes to everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid that that window's kind of starting to close. And again, not to say like the hope isn't there, but this is again my rephrasing and kind of reframing in the sense that maybe it just doesn't look the way that I thought it was going to look, you
Oh
know,
wow. Hmm.
and maybe it's a bit of circuitous path,
Hmm.
but it's one that only God can take credit for, right? So
Right.
again, to expect the unexpected is something that I've learned to kind of posture myself with, but it doesn't always make things easy,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
I don't
Wow.
know. Does
No,
that make sense?
no, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think, yeah, what you're saying, I think a lot of people who've actually been in the Korean American church as a second generation congregation member, I think can relate to what you're saying. And yeah, my stance is probably for people who haven't had these kind of difficult situations as you have. But I'm glad though. I'm glad to hear though that even though you went through this really crazy thing, that you're still that you still hold on to that hope that there's a possibility, and you still see that the reconciliation is kind of a valuable thing, that you haven't completely tossed it into the garbage.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I mean, like I was trying to, I guess, say before, is like I think it's because it's so intimately tied to the gospel for me,
Mm, yeah.
right? Like if I throw that out, then I throw the gospel out, or
Mm,
I start having to pick and choose like to what the gospel can really apply to,
wow.
right?
Wow.
And then you start personalizing it to say the gospel is just about me, but not against the institution or anything that's man-made. Like it starts to really take away from, to me, what needs to be intrinsically the power of the gospel, and
Mm,
its ability to, yeah, just save, right? Like, and
yeah.
so yeah, so I think the reason why I hold on to it is not because I think it's great, right? I don't think, again, we can talk about church as a whole, but the vehicle and what it's become is, it's not something that I'm like super happy about, in terms
Yeah.
of just, you know um but um but I believe in the gospel.
Mm,
And so therefore, if I proclaim, that, then there's nothing that's really off limits,
yeah.
um, and its power. So yeah, I think that's why, right? Like it's really kind of predicated upon that, as opposed to the church and its, just its ability to kind of get its act together.
Yeah.
Right? If I was just looking at that, I'd be like, no way. Like you are out of your mind to think that
Yeah.
the church can get its act together and actually become, what we believe that the church could be and should be, right? But if I don't focus on the church, but I'm actually focusing on the thing that powers the church, then I'm like, okay, then that actually, I think I can have hope,
Mm,
um, cautious, but still hope nonetheless, right? Like, and
yeah.
so, um,
Wow, that's
yeah, so I
great.
think that's it, right? Like that's why, so,
Mm.
um but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think we were trying to talk about church this whole time, were we? Like,
I was gonna ask, how's the time look for you? Do you have like a hard stop at any point?
I don't have a hard stop, but I do have work that I
Yeah.
probably should do. But I'm good. Let's just roll. I mean, whatever, well,
Because
yeah.
I definitely do want to ask you about ARC, because you're wearing the hoodie there.
Oh, snap. Yeah. That wasn't
Yeah.
even that wasn't even on purpose. That's how awesome this hoodie is. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so dope. I seem to be the most productive in this hoodie.
Yeah, so for longtime listeners, you'll be kind of familiar with what ARC is, Atlanta Run Club. James Rowe was on the podcast at one point who explained it to us and all of that. And you have a new role at ARC, right? Do you want to kind of explain what that role is and what you do there?
Right. Okay, I can explain the first part. The second part I'm still trying to figure out. Um So um, yeah, so if you guys are familiar with the Atlanta Run Club, ARC, it's a cool little thing that James started. At the end of last year, I mean, this is conversations that were kind of taking place on and off, but towards the end of last year, I think we collectively, myself and everyone involved, decided to kind of formalize the Atlanta Run Club. So before it was literally just kind of a I don't know, kind of a social experiment.
Right.
I don't know how you would describe it, but it wasn't really super formal. It was very informal. And then it had a big race, and people started to see the power of its power, like its reach, right? Like in mobilization and ability, and largely because of James and his network, and the people that were involved in it. So with all that being said, like the next iteration was like, hey, like, why don't we turn it into a formal 501c3 and try to one, build capacity and scale its impact, right? Like that's my language, obviously. And so, but the best way to do that is, we're going back and forth. Like, should it be a for-profit? What would be the product, service? Make it a nonprofit? Obviously there's pros and cons to both. Landed on it becoming a nonprofit, and so we got our official 501c3 like in November. Yeah, and I am now kind of the interim executive director. I like to use the word interim because I'm not getting comfortable here, but I do
Interesting.
understand that there's a lot of work to be done to get I think ARC to that next kind of chapter phase of growth. So yeah, so what I do. Yeah, I don't know what I do. I try to bring some leadership, some organization. Really, it's more organization to the group, and and try to get it on a kind of a growth plan. Because yeah, I really believe that where there's no vision, like people just really wander and ultimately
Yeah.
perish, right? Like
Yeah.
good passions can only stay lit for so long before they fade out. And so you need to be able to then harness that passion and try to infuse it with some vision to say, hey, like, let's try to go after this, over the long haul, and play the long game a little bit. And so I think I'm here to help kind of establish the long game, right? For the Atlanta Run Club.
Wow. So, in terms of growth, like, what do you kind of envision ARC looking like once this growth happens?
It's a great question. I think growth is in multiple arenas, right? Like I think the Atlanta Run Club needs to understand its own identity. Of like, when you say what is the Atlanta Run Club, like it has to have an identity. I think that's the first area of kind of growth, right? Formally, we're a 501c3, but what are we, right? Are we a club? Is it yeah, what is it? So actually understanding what it is, and getting its identity. The second part of growth to me is being a sustainable organization, right? Like that can actually have staff. My 5-year goal is literally try to stabilize it so they can have like 1.5 like staff members,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So an executive director that can replace me, and then maybe hopefully someone part-time. And obviously there's going to be tons of volunteers and stuff like that. But for me, like, there has to be a financial growth and stabilization that happens to the organization, which happens again for a nonprofit. It's programs, it's impact, it's investors, donors, whatever. So yeah, for me, those are where growth kind of starts to really happen. And if I can see ARC 5 years from now, it will have a proper executive director that makes at least what a youth pastor would make. And yeah, and it has programs, and it has people that say, hey, ARC is we need that organization in Atlanta,
Mm.
you know. I would love to hear testimonies coming out of it, you know. So the mission of ARC, our vision is to really start to see our city and our communities transformed, you know, through people,
Mm.
right? And so, you know, our hope, our working hypothesis is that, you know, when you are active, particularly through the sport of running, it helps kind of create the headspace that you need to, you know, just kind of think more clearly, you
Mm.
know.
Mhm.
You start to help realize your own kind of abilities, right? And running really helps you cope with everyday stress, you know. And I think when people have that kind of headspace and that kind of capacity, they can they stop focusing on themselves and they start focusing on others, you know.
Mm. Yeah.
And our hope is that if we can create that in people through the sport of running, that our cities and our communities can be transformed, right? Because people
Wow.
can start caring about things other than themselves. I mean, don't get me wrong, people are always going to care about themselves, right?
Right.
But you know, I think if if we can promote it in a way that, you know, this active lifestyle transforms communities and cities, and be able to be the vehicle for that, right? Help them get there from point A to point C, right?
Mm.
That if we can bridge that gap, that in some way, like, you know, we could do some good,
Wow,
you know.
that's awesome.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
and you guys are doing something that right now, right? That actively is gonna be helping a part of the community, right?
Yeah. So I'm super stoked. So we launched this kind of series of activation campaigns, runs, where we're literally raising dollars for every miles that's being run, right?
Mm.
Like, so we're calling it Miles for Change. And um, yeah, I thought it was really clever,
Yeah, I like the
but I
double
don't,
meaning.
yeah, I don't know if everyone picked up on it, but David, that's why I like you, because you're super sharp. Um, but yeah, Miles for Change, like literally,
Hmm.
um, you know, for every mile that's run and then logged, uh, ARC will help raise a matching amount, right? And
Oh
so
wow.
our goal is 3,000 miles in 3 months, which
Mm.
equates to $3,000. And we are partnering. So the beauty of this is we get to partner with other organizations that are doing awesome work, right? Like,
Mm.
so we're partnering with, you know, a good friend of ours, We Love Bu High, and they've been doing this really cool um, program called Feeding Families of Buford Highway.
Oh.
And they've been, since the pandemic, have been going out and, you know, obviously taking in-kind donations, raising funds to feed families that were affected on Buford Highway. And yeah, and I thought, I met with Lily, the executive director. I thought it was like super cool. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, we need to figure out how we can get involved, you know. And
Mm.
I think, you know, it can serve a mission where we can activate people for a cause, right? And so uh, if we can collectively do this, I think it brings purpose and aligns, you know, kind of that activation component.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's what we're doing. You know, there's one little wrinkle that we stuck in there because uh, we started a Strava group, and I don't know if you're familiar with Strava, but Strava is a run app, and everyone can join a group. And basically, I kind of equated to the Facebook of kind of the recreational community. So you can
Mm.
do running, biking, swimming, all this kind of stuff, and basically it tracks what you do. And there's like forums and groups and things like that. And we started one for ARC, and so we have like over 100 people in that group, which basically, you know, if yeah, it if everyone was kind of on it and we did that collective run, that we'd be done in like a week, you know, because
Hmm.
yeah, you got some like ballers, right? Like you got, you know, you got people that are running like literally like 13 miles as a warm up, you know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, so what we've done is try to make it more of an active process, that you would actually run the miles, track it on Strava, and then go onto our website and like submit it,
Hmm.
as like, hey, this is the miles that I want to submit towards, the campaign. And so
Hmm.
that way we're inviting active participation as opposed to, just passive, like I just happen to run and just keep logging these miles, but they don't even have any idea what those miles are equating to and why they're
Hmm.
running it per se, right? So
Wow.
yeah, so that's Miles for Change, and like super excited about it. So
Is this
and
a group that anyone can join, or do they have to be some sort of member of ARC to be a part of, or how does that work?
yeah, anyone can join the Strava group.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, anyone. It's international, right?
So,
So
so
yeah,
anybody can participate in the Miles for Change?
they can,
Mm,
yeah,
okay.
but they just have to submit their miles for change, right?
Mm, right, right.
They can't just run miles and expect change,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
they need to literally, contribute their miles as contribution. And then what I'm doing is going and finding sponsors, funders that will fund the other side of that, right? Like, so you
Mm,
got people that are running, and then you got people that are giving, and then we're trying to be the conduit, between the two and kind of brokering, the impact with the activation.
wait, so just so I'm clear, is it a runner will run on the Strava group thing and submit the miles to ARC, and they submit the amount of, like, if they ran 10 miles, is it they submit $10 as well, and then that gets matched by you guys? Is that how it works?
No, they literally just say how many miles, and they say 10, and they just submit it, right? And then we
Hmm.
have kind of an active tracker
Hmm.
that shows kind of the collective miles.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then we as ARC will then help match that. Like, we'll find the donors to match that money.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so we're correct. We're actually in the midst of uh, trying to pull together I'm calling it a community run fund.
Hmm.
It's like a war chest for community work. And so that's kind of its own separate kind of initiative, right?
Hmm.
But that fund will then um, be uh, directly tied to this particular program, right? Because after 3,000 miles, we, I'm talking to another organization that I'm, hoping to possibly collab with and kind of promote the work that they're doing, and we'll
Hmm.
raise money for them and run for them over the summer. And it's like just running for causes, right? Like, we're just running, we're going to run anyway,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We might as well do some good while we run,
Mm,
or if we want to do good, right, we might as well just run while we're doing it, right? Like, so
yeah.
either way, I feel like it's kind of a winning proposition if we can just get people off the couch and off their phones and get outside a little bit.
Wow,
um
that's awesome.
yeah, so
Yeah, this is
yeah.
actually a really opportune moment for me. The other day, my wife, not in a mean way, in a loving way, was talking to me about how I've kind of gained weight over this pandemic period. And I actually started running. So I ran a marathon last February, and I literally
Yeah.
haven't run since. Like that was my second marathon, and I was like, I'm done with running, so I stopped running. But I
Wow.
started running again today. So hey,
Well,
it's
there you go. make
yeah,
your make your runs count, man. Those are empty miles if you don't
yeah,
submit them. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
like empty calories. Like,
yeah.
you might
So
as well.
yeah, so for the listeners out there who need motivation to run, or you are running, I think this is miles for change. It is, I think, a really good way to, yeah, like EJ is saying, not let your miles just be empty miles. And all the details on that is on the Instagram page, right?
It's on Instagram and our website, atlantarunclub.com.
Oh, okay.
So I would invite people to check out. And I think that was the pivot a little bit too. Like, I think starting Atlanta Run Club started on Instagram. Like, it was kind of a social media experiment,
Yeah.
right? Like, kind of a social experiment in some ways. And I think it was largely successful, and largely due to James and Christian being able to bring it life,
Hmm.
and give it this kind of brand identity that people really kind of jived with. I think one of the moves is in this growth is trying to pull people away from social media, which is, again, a whole nother conversation, but we're trying to move them into, onto the website and getting more information and literally kind of off their phones. In my opinion, I'm like, just get off your, like if we push everything through social media and then are telling them to get off their phones, it's kind of this weird mixed messaging where we're like, the only way they can get the information is on their phone.
Yeah.
We want them to go out and run, right? Like, so anyway, all that to say, all of our information is on our website. AtlantaRunClub.com. We got a pretty, it's a start, David. It's a start. Humble beginnings, and and so I'm super excited to be a part of it.
Wow, that's so great. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'm gonna ask you a favor. Do you think is it possible to record another episode later in the future, maybe a few weeks down the line? Because
yeah, I mean, you're totally putting me on the spot. I don't know how I could say no at this point. You're like a super smart guy. You gotta watch out for David shit, man. Like it's yes, it's very well calculated and well played. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah, because I mean, we had a bunch of other stuff we wanted to talk about today, but the first part, it was really good, and I'm glad we got to talk about it. And EJ, you are one of the people that constantly kept coming up. When I would record with people, they would say, "Hey, you should have EJ on," or like just in conversation, they would say, "Hey, like EJ would be really great on your podcast." And now I'm seeing why they were recommending you. You have so much, to offer, so much like input.
David, what took you so long then, man? I mean, if all these people were like dropping my name left and right, what?
No, if I'm honest, there's a part of me that is a little bit.
Please be honest. Everyone's listening. Please be honest.
There was a part of me that was a little intimidated by you, like in the sense that, like, what value would he get from being on my podcast? Like that. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I'm going to therapy. I'm like working through these things.
Do you want to talk about it now? Like, I don't.
No,
that's very interesting though. Like, that's a very interesting way to psych yourself out.
Yeah. So I have this thing where I like, what? Actually, let's save it for the next podcast. I'll just open it all up for you, and then just let you know kind of my entire thought process of how I got there.
Oh man, this is brilliant. See, you're brilliant. See, David, gosh, man, you're smart, man. This is why your podcast is so successful. It's these like cliffhangers. Like people are like, oh no, anyway.
Because I have to tune in, and EJ now has to come back to hear about it.
That's right.
EJ, thank you so much for your time today. I know I promised you we would be done at 9. It's 9:30, so I'm so sorry for going over. But yeah, thank you so much for your story, your honesty, and yeah, I get the sense that you have this real desire and passion to grow things and to really bring a vision path forward for a lot of different organizations. And I think that's something that we can all kind of take away from this conversation. The importance of having a vision, the importance of seeing the growth opportunities, and executing to not just stay still, but to move forward. Because like you were saying, when things just aren't happening, it kind of dies away. So thank you so much for what you shared with us today. I'm really excited about our next episode that we'll be recording.
Yeah, me too.
So guys, if you had any feedback on today's episode, please let me know at IHTHTpodcast@gmail.com, or on Instagram at I hope to hear this, or on Twitter at IHTHT podcast. And please make sure to go check out the ARC website. That's AtlantaRunClub.com, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and join me in running for change, for the Miles for Change program.
Miles for Change, That's right.
Yeah. Well, EJ, again, thank you so much for tonight, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was fun.